Zafira had once known happiness. She had once been the cherished daughter of a loving father, her world filled with warmth and kindness. But ever since he passed away, everything changed. Her stepmother, Lady Amara, who had once pretended to care for her, revealed her true nature. The woman was cruel, heartless, and greedy. She treated Zafira as nothing more than a servant, forcing her to do endless chores from morning till night. While Lady Amara and her own daughter lived in luxury, Zafira was left in rags, eating scraps like a beggar in her own home. No one defended her, no one cared. The servants, afraid of Lady Amara's wrath, kept their heads down. The neighbours whispered, but never interfered. Zafira bore it all in silence, hoping that one day fate would be kind to her. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. One evening, as she scrubbed the floors, she overheard Lady Amara speaking to a strange man in hushed tones. Curiosity made her pause, her heart pounding as she listened. "She's young and strong," Lady Amara was saying coldly. "She'll make a good wife for you." Zafira's breath caught in her throat. Wife? Who was she talking about? The man, whose voice was rough and unfamiliar, responded, "I don't have much money." Lady Amara scoffed. "I don't care. Just take her away. I never want to see her face again." Fear gripped Zafira's chest. She stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Stepmother, what are you saying?" Lady Amara turned to her with a wicked smile. "You should be grateful, dear. I've found you a husband. He's a hard-working man. You'll have a roof over your head." Zafira's stomach twisted in horror. "No, you can't do this. Please." She turned to the servants, to her stepsister, to anyone who might help, but they all looked away. No one would save her. The man, a rough-looking woodcutter dressed in tattered clothes, stepped forward and grabbed her wrist. "Come." Zafira struggled, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't do this. I don't want to go." She looked at Lady Amara, desperate. "I'll do whatever you ask. Just don't send me away like this." But Lady Amara only laughed. "You were never wanted here, Zafira. Now go and never come back." Zafira's cries echoed through the house, but no one listened. No one cared. As she was dragged away into the night, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She had lost her home, her dignity, and any hope she had left. All she knew was that she was being taken to a place she didn't know, to a life she never chose, and to a man who was a complete stranger. She felt utterly alone, and yet, as the road stretched out before her, she had no idea that her life was about to change in a way she never could have imagined. Zafira's heart pounded as she was led through the dark, unfamiliar roads. She had stopped crying now. There was no point. Her hands trembled, her feet ached, and fear settled deep in her bones. She didn't know where this man was taking her, or what kind of life awaited her. After what felt like hours, they finally stopped in front of a small wooden hut at the edge of the forest. The man let go of her wrist and turned to face her. In the dim moonlight, she could see his face clearly for the first time. He was not old or cruel-looking as she had imagined. He had sharp but kind eyes, a rough beard, and a calm expression. "I am Idris," he said simply. "This is my home." Zafira said nothing. She kept her arms wrapped around herself, still shaking. She had been sold like an object, dragged away from everything she had ever known, and now she was standing in front of a stranger who claimed to be her husband. Idris sighed, noticing her fear. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, stepping back. "I won't hurt you." Zafira looked at him suspiciously. She had expected a life of suffering, beatings, hunger, endless labor, but Idris did none of that. Instead, he opened the door and gestured for her to enter. Inside, the house was small but warm. A fire crackled in the corner, casting a golden glow. There was a wooden table, a few chairs, and a simple bed. It wasn't much, but it felt safe. "Sit," Idris said, pulling out a chair. She hesitated before slowly lowering herself onto it. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a plate of food, bread, some stew, and fresh water. He placed it in front of her without a word. Zafira stared at the food. She had expected cruelty, not kindness. Was this a trick? A test? "I know you don't trust me," Idris said softly, sitting across from her. "And I don't blame you." She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of deception, but there was none. He looked sincere. Still, she didn't speak. She just picked up the bread and took a small bite. It was warm, fresh, better than anything she had eaten in days. Before she realized it, she was eating hungrily, finishing everything on the plate. Idris watched silently, then stood up. "You can sleep in the bed," he said. "I'll sleep outside." Zafira's head snapped up. "Outside," he nodded. "I won't force you into anything. You've been through enough." Her throat tightened. This wasn't what she had expected at all. She had been ready to endure pain, to fight for her survival. But here was a man who offered her kindness instead. It made her feel confused, vulnerable. She wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. So she just sat there, staring at the fire, as Idris walked toward the door. Before stepping out, he turned to her once more. "You are free to leave if you wish, but if you stay, I promise you will never be hurt under my roof." Then, without another word, he disappeared into the night. Zafira sat in silence, staring at the closed door. Her heart felt heavy, her mind overwhelmed. She had been expecting the worst. Instead, she had found something she hadn't felt in a long time: kindness. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without fear. Days turned into weeks, and Zafira slowly began to settle into her new life. Idris was nothing like she had feared. He was kind, patient, and never once treated her as a servant or an object. He gave her space, allowed her to make her own choices, and never raised his voice. But something about him didn't add up. He may have dressed like a poor woodcutter, but his way of speaking was different. His words were thoughtful, refined, like someone who had been educated, someone who belonged to a world far beyond this simple village. He spoke of the kingdom's politics, the struggles of the people, and even the royal family, as if he knew them personally. Zafira couldn't ignore it. And when they visited the marketplace together, she noticed something even stranger. People bowed slightly as he passed, not openly, but just enough for her to see. Some whispered his name under their breath before quickly looking away. "Why do they do that?" she finally asked one evening. Idris paused, then shrugged. "Maybe they respect me," but respect was one thing. Fear was another, and she had seen both in their eyes. One night, as she lay awake, she heard voices outside. Carefully, she tiptoed to the window and peered through the small opening. Idris stood there in the moonlight, speaking in hushed tones to two men dressed in dark cloaks. "Everything is going as planned," Idris said. "She is adjusting well." Zafira's breath caught in her throat. Were they talking about her? "She must not know the truth yet," one of the men replied. "The king is waiting for your decision." Zafira's heart pounded. The king? What was Idris hiding? The next morning, she couldn't hold it in any longer. As they sat by the fire, she looked him in the eyes and asked, "Who are you really?" Idris froze. For the first time, she saw hesitation in his expression. Then, with a deep sigh, he stood up. "Come with me," he said. Confused and nervous, Zafira followed him outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Idris turned to face her, his expression serious. Then, slowly, he reached for the edge of his rough, tattered cloak and pulled it away. Zafira gasped. Beneath the disguise was not a poor woodcutter, but a man dressed in fine garments, embroidered with royal insignias. His posture changed, his presence more commanding. "I am not Idris," he said quietly. "My real name is Prince Ramy, heir to the throne." Zafira staggered back, unable to believe what she was hearing. "No, this is a joke, right?" Prince Ramy shook his head. "I had to hide my identity to find a bride with a true heart, one who would love me for who I am, not for my wealth." He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "I have been watching you for a long time, Zafira. I knew of your suffering, and I wanted to see if your kindness remained even in the darkest times." Tears welled in Zafira's eyes. The man she had feared, the man she had learned to trust. He was a prince. Her stepmother had sold her, thinking she was sending her to misery. Instead, she had unknowingly handed her over to the future king. Her world spun. Everything she had believed was a lie. Prince Ramy reached for her hands gently. "You are not a servant. You are not unwanted. You are meant for something greater, Zafira." She stared at him, emotions crashing over her like waves. Fear, shock, and deep within her heart, hope. Prince Ramy looked at Zafira with sincerity in his eyes, as if he was about to share something that had been weighing on him for a long time. "I didn't come here by chance," he began, his voice soft yet filled with conviction. "I disguised myself as Idris, the poor woodcutter, because I needed to find someone who could love me for who I truly am, not for the wealth or the title I hold." Zafira felt her heart race as she listened. But why me? She whispered, still trying to grasp the reality of everything. Prince Ramy stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Because I saw your strength, your kindness, despite all the cruelty you faced. I watched you, Zafira, and I knew your heart was pure. I couldn't just marry anyone. I wanted someone who didn't care about riches, someone who understood pain and still chose to be good. Zafira's breath caught in her throat. She had spent so many years suffering under Lady Amara's harsh hand, thinking that no one would ever see her worth. But here, in front of her, was a man who had seen her pain, and somehow had found beauty in it. "You've been watching me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Prince Ramy nodded. "I knew of your suffering. I knew how your stepmother treated you, and I wanted to see if you could still believe in kindness, even after everything you've been through." Zafira's chest tightened. She didn't know whether to feel angry, confused, or grateful. Gratitude for the kindness he had shown her, despite his disguise. And yet, a part of her still struggled with the idea that everything had been a test. "I'm not like the others, Zafira," Prince Ramy continued. "I want you to be with me, not because I'm a prince, but because you are the person I believe in. Will you marry me, Zafira? Will you be my queen?" The words felt like a dream. How could she, a girl who had been treated like nothing, be asked to be a queen? How could she go from being the lowest of the low to standing beside a prince? Zafira's mind raced. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt swirled in her head. Could she really accept this offer? Could she trust him after everything? But then, as she looked into his eyes that had been nothing but kind, nothing but understanding, a sense of peace washed over her. This wasn't a dream. This was real. With a shaky breath, Zafira nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Yes, I'll be your queen." Tears filled her eyes as she spoke, emotions overwhelming her. The girl who had been tossed aside, sold to a stranger, had found something she never thought possible: love, kindness, and a future full of hope. Prince Ramy's face lit up with joy, his eyes softening as he reached out to take her hands. "You are more than I ever imagined," he said, his voice filled with warmth. Zafira smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with emotion. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She wasn't someone to be discarded. She was Zafira, and she had a future, a beautiful, unexpected future, with the man who saw her for who she truly was. The day had finally come. Zafira stood at the gates of her childhood home, her heart racing in her chest. She was no longer the same girl who had left this place in tears. Today, she was dressed in beautiful royal attire, a long flowing gown of deep blue, with a crown that sparkled in the sunlight. By her side was Prince Ramy, now known to the world as her true love, her partner, and her future king. As the gates opened, Zafira's childhood memories flooded her mind. The harsh words of Lady Amara, the long hours spent cleaning and working, the loneliness. But now, everything had changed. She wasn't that girl anymore. When Lady Amara saw them approaching, her face went pale. She had heard rumors about the royal couple, but seeing Zafira, the girl she had so cruelly treated, standing there in royal attire beside Prince Ramy, was too much to bear. "No, it can't be," Lady Amara muttered, stepping back in disbelief. Zafira walked toward her stepmother with her head held high, feeling stronger than ever. "Lady Amara," she said, her voice steady, "I have returned, but not as your servant." Lady Amara's eyes widened, her mouth hanging open as she tried to piece together what was happening. "What is this? What is going on?" she stammered. Prince Ramy stepped forward, his presence commanding. "Lady Amara, I have come to demand justice." The word struck her like a bolt of lightning. "What do you mean? I've done nothing wrong." Lady Amara's voice cracked, panic setting in. Prince Ramy's gaze was sharp as he addressed her. "You sold Zafira, an innocent girl, into slavery. You took advantage of her kindness and her heart. That is a crime." Zafira stood beside him, feeling the weight of the moment. For years, Lady Amara had made her life a living nightmare, treating her like dirt. Now, the tables had turned, and it felt like the most beautiful kind of justice. Lady Amara's face turned red with anger and fear. "You can't do this. I am the lady of this house. I have wealth, power." Prince Ramy's expression remained cold. "You had wealth and power, but you used it to harm others. Now you will pay for your crimes." He turned to his royal guards, who had followed them here. "Begin the investigation. everything will be uncovered. She must answer for what she has done. Zafira could barely contain her emotions. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, of seeing Lady Amara face the consequences of her cruelty. And now it was happening. The investigation revealed everything: Lady Amara's abuse, her lies, and her cruelty. It was all laid bare for the world to see. Prince Ramy stood tall as he delivered the final judgment. Lady Amara, for your wickedness and for selling an innocent girl, you are stripped of your wealth and titles. You will be exiled from the kingdom. You will live the life you tried to give Zafira, alone, with nothing. Lady Amara's eyes filled with fury and despair. "No, you can't do this to me!" she screamed, but it was too late. With a single gesture, her entire life was torn away. All the riches, all the power she had so cruelly used to control Zafira, gone. Now she was nothing more than an exiled woman with no place in the kingdom. Zafira looked at her stepmother. Once, a figure of fear and torment in her life, now reduced to nothing. The taste of justice was sweet, but what made it even sweeter was the fact that Zafira no longer had to live in fear. She had found her place in the world, and Lady Amara had finally faced the consequences of her actions. Prince Ramy placed a hand on Zafira's shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. "You are free now, Zafira. This is your life, and it's just beginning." Zafira smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Ramy. Thank you for giving me my life back." Zafira's life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. From the girl who was mistreated, sold like property, and treated as nothing more than a servant, she had transformed into a symbol of hope, strength, and kindness. The girl who had been invisible to the world was now a beloved future queen, admired by everyone who knew her story. The grand ceremony was nothing short of magical. Prince Ramy and Zafira stood hand in hand before a crowd of royal dignitaries, common folk, and friends who had watched her journey. The royal palace was decorated with beautiful flowers, the air was filled with music, and the people cheered for the couple who had gone through so much to be together. Zafira, in her wedding gown, looked every bit the queen she was about to become. When she walked down the aisle, it wasn't just a marriage, it was the culmination of everything she had endured. It was the moment that proved to the world that kindness and goodness would always win. She had never asked for this life, she had only hoped for the simplest of things: love, respect, and a chance to be happy. And now she had all of that and more. Prince Ramy, her loving husband, stood by her side throughout the ceremony, his eyes full of admiration. He had seen her strength in her darkest moments, and now he was proud to call her his queen. As they exchanged vows, Zafira's heart was full. She thought of her struggles, of her pain, her loneliness, and her tears. But now, it all seemed worth it. She had fought for her dignity, and in the end, she had found love in the most unexpected place. The news of their wedding spread like wildfire across the kingdom. People marveled at Zafira's story, and soon, her name was on everyone's lips. She had gone from being an abandoned girl to a future queen, and her journey became an inspiration to thousands. People spoke of her kindness, her courage, and her ability to forgive even after everything she had been through. Zafira had shown them that no matter how hard life might be, it's never too late to change your fate. As for Lady Amara, she got a taste of the consequences of her cruel actions. After being exiled, she was forced to live in the same poverty she had wished upon Zafira. Stripped of her wealth, her power, and her title, she lived a life of isolation and hardship, a stark contrast to the life she had once known. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was the justice she deserved. The very riches she had used to control and torment Zafira were now gone, leaving her with nothing. Zafira couldn't help but feel a sense of peace when she thought about Lady Amara's fate. She had suffered for so long under her stepmother's cruelty, but now Zafira was free, free to live her life, free to be the woman she had always been meant to be: strong, kind, and loved. As Prince Ramy and Zafira sat together on their wedding day, surrounded by the people who had supported her throughout her journey, Zafira realized something powerful. She had come a long way from the girl who had once begged for mercy. She had found love, justice, and happiness, not because of wealth or status, but because she had stayed true to herself. And that, she knew, was the most powerful thing of all. Her story was a reminder to everyone that no matter how difficult the journey may seem, kindness, love, and resilience would always lead to a brighter future.